It's really good to be here today to be able to share with you our red meat origin brand, as well as share the process we've gone through in the development of that brand and how we've captured the insights and used them to inform what you'll see today. I just want to start by sharing one of our key guiding philosophies throughout this process, and it's been this, that ultimately success will only be derived by an industry working collectively together. And so this has been guiding us throughout this entire process has informed the way we've gone about engaging and consulting with all of these participants throughout the industry. I'm often asked the question, particularly by our meat exporting companies, about how do our brands work together? How does this origin brand work with my brand when I've invested so much time, energy and resource and effort into it? And so I use this pretty simple analogy of the Earth's core to explain it. So at the base layers of the Earth's core are, I guess, the universal truths that essentially underpin largely all of New Zealand's sheep and beef meat farming production. And that is captured in our unique place in the world, our environment, our green pastures, our grass-fed, the way we do things. And that environment has actually informed our approach to farming, which in essence is low intensity, hands-off, light touch versus other international farming systems. And what those two elements result in is a pretty unique eating experience that is only derived from a place like New Zealand. So above those layers are opportunities for our exporting brand owners, if you like, to be able to really hone in on what makes their brand different, what's unique about their value proposition, but to leverage the platform we create through the universal origin brand. So that's how it works. Throughout the process of development, we've been very much customer and consumer insight driven. So this is less about what we think is fantastic in the world and how we should tell our story, although that is important, and it's much more important and critical that we understand the value drivers and the needs of either the customer or consumer, so those that are buying and engaging with the product. And that started right from when we immersed ourselves in existing research and insight in order to form a point of view around what our story, our unique story could be, right through to taking it and testing that proposition early in the marketplace. In actual fact, we tested 6 different themes and ideas in international markets, coming back, using those insights to develop and refine our strategy, and then going back out into the marketplace again, and once again testing, validating, until we got to a point where we felt very confident that what we've got is actually going to resonate and generate greater return and value for us. So these are the markets we chose to focus on. New Zealand exports to roughly 120 plus countries around the world, so we needed some focus. And there are a mix of countries that represent existing value and volume, some that represent perhaps a percentage of missed opportunity for New Zealand imports into those countries. Some are emerging markets, and while they don't demonstrate great trade from a value and volume perspective right now, possibly could do in the future, for example, India and Indonesia. And we also included New Zealand in that mix, just to get a perspective on how consumers here felt about our proposition. We spent an enormous amount of time talking to people. Largely that consisted of consumers through consumer focus group sessions, and we ran multiple sessions in multiple cities within each of those international countries. We spent a lot of time talking with participants in the supply chain, whether they were importers, distributors, retailers, even food service professionals, chefs, restaurateurs, even butchers. We spent time in supermarkets, retail supermarkets and places where you could purchase meat, to understand the international context, the cultural aspects, price, packaging, all those sorts of things. And within those environments, we had real consumers take us around and actually help us understand how they navigated the retail environment, what stood out, how do they make decisions, because those retail environments internationally are very different from what we experience here in New Zealand. And we also spent time talking with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise and market managers to understand not only that market perspective, but the New Zealand context and how we've been operating over many years in those markets. And here's what we found out. This is a high-level sort of pull together of the global insights. And what we know is that health-conscious consumers are choosing to consume red meat less frequently. That's a fact. But when they are choosing to consume it, they're looking for really high-quality, premium red meat that's more naturally raised, free from things like hormones, growth promotants, antibiotics, non-GMO and things like that. Grass-fed red meat is very much on the rise for these people. Our consumers are modal, which means that they're not in the same need state all of the time. So a simple example of that is, many of us are largely driven by the need state of convenience during the week. And then on the weekends, we've got a little more time to indulge. We'll often spend time preparing a meal or thinking about the ingredients. And in international markets, people are travelling really long distances to go and source the ideal ingredients, source their meat from their preferred butcher, for example. Irrespective of the need state people are in, they still want premium quality meat. So even if that's ground beef for burgers during the week, they want high quality premium red meat, free from all those things I mentioned before. What we did find is that beef development will be a challenge internationally. It's a crowded marketplace. There is actually very little unique selling proposition difference between the offerings, and New Zealand is being left behind. I just pulled some stats the other day which were quite interesting. I was looking at the US and the rise of Mexico in terms of the imports of beef into the US market. Similarly in China, looking at the beef market, Brazil and Uruguay have increased their imports into that country, or exports to China, significantly in the last 3 to 4 years. So beef is a crowded marketplace and we're getting left behind. New Zealand hasn't been in that space, let alone telling its story. And on a scale of premium imported meat, when you ask consumers to tell us what comes to mind, New Zealand frequently, if not always, features well behind Australia, Japan, outside of the US, it would be the US, Canada, and more often than not now, South American countries. Lamb is a slightly different story. So we found it's got strong potential as a category in terms of value growth. It's perceived by health-conscious consumers as being more naturally raised. It's seen as leaner. And it also offers a unique eating experience that is distinctive to that of other protein options available, such as beef, pork, chicken, fish, etc. Our competitors are well established. They're investing significantly in market development throughout the supply chain. So not just in consumer promotion, but in market development, relationship development, market access, all of these things throughout that supply chain. None more so than these guys. They're everywhere in those markets that we think are key for us, and they're winning. They've gained traction. They've gained awareness. Retail is incredibly powerful. So they are the gatekeeper and controller of what gets put in front of consumers. And many of them are taking on the responsibility for, dealing with a number of the value drivers consumers have around whether food is sustainably produced or animal welfare credentials and so on. You only have to walk into a Whole Foods store in the US and you see it blazoned in their mission and vision. They've got the GAP program, etc. So consumers can walk into those retail stores and not have to worry about those things because the retailer's taking care of it for them, and they can make purchase decisions based on other needs and value drivers that they have. What consumers are becoming much more anxious about is food production in general. Where does my food come from? How is it produced? What's in it? As well as animal welfare. They're getting greater access to information about food production systems, and they don't like it, particularly large industrial food production systems. They don't like it, whether that's through Netflix or social media or whatever. And so they describe for us a need and a want to connect with real food, They described it as real food. That's more natural. That's raised in a more natural way, as it should be. And so that bodes well for the way we farm here in New Zealand. Ultimately, though, it doesn't matter how good our story is, it needs to be, or our brand is, it needs to be underpinned by an amazing eating experience. And so this is where potentially you guys can come in. Given the traits that result, or some of the traits that result in good eating quality, such as IMF, inherently heritable, genetics play an important role in making sure that we can deliver a product that is of superior eating quality, largely driven through taste. So the role of origin. Well, it actually plays an incredibly important role in the pathway to purchase. So it acts as a tool for consumers, retailers, or in effect anyone that's buying imported meat, and acts as a shortcut to understanding and trust. To break that down a little bit further, for consumers that are seeking greater levels of assurance when they're looking to purchase products, particularly meat in this instance, they look beyond the retail brand to country of origin when they're making decisions. I do it myself here in New Zealand. I buy frozen berries for smoothies. I'll always turn the pack over and have a look. If it says Chile or Canada, I'm making decisions based on that. If it said China, I wouldn't buy it. And I'm sure many of you do that here in New Zealand, and that's on steroids in those international markets where there's so much imported food available. The key point here is that any producer or exporter brand almost always sits and is considered within the context of the country or place it is from. And so they work in harmony with one another. And so when we come to thinking about developing greater value in our brand, there's a couple of routes we can go down. One is process-driven differentiation. So things like, in terms of the best level, fresh, chilled, delivering product in a format that's ready for consumers or chefs to use, etc. And on the other side, we've got product differentiation, where we're actually investing in unique breeds or unique feeds that result in an eating experience that differentiates New Zealand's offering to that of other nations. The trouble with process value-added differentiation is that it's easily copyable and won't develop a sustained long-term competitive advantage. It's in the product-based differentiation that we must focus for New Zealand's future prosperity. And so again, this is an area where certainly I personally feel that you guys can play a role. If we can develop unique breeds or feeding systems that result in an eating experience that is distinctive and can only be found in New Zealand, that is a competitive advantage. And if we hold on to that IP and don't share it, that's an advantage we can sustain over the longer term. So just jumping back to what people see, what do international people see when they think about New Zealand? Well, overall our image is positive, thanks to Lord of the Rings and our tourism industry. They've done a fantastic job in positioning New Zealand as a country. But when it comes to red meat, sheep and beef, the awareness and knowledge of New Zealand as a producing nation of those proteins, let alone how we do it, it's incredibly weak. When we share with people our story, images, all those sorts of things, and ask them to describe New Zealand, they often look at images like this and say, that's organic. Now, we never use the words organic at all in any of our material and our story ideas or anything like that. It's what consumers came up with as a definition for essentially natural. So they'd look at that and say that's organic, but what they're really saying is that's a shortcut to natural. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I want in the food I'm buying. To others, what we often take as everyday or mundane is simply profound. We brought a guy, a food technologist or food innovation guy, actually, I don't know his real title, Mike Lee out from the States. to help us understand the US perspective a little bit better. We took him out on farm and things like that, and these are his words essentially. He was utterly amazed at what we've got here and how we do it. We know that consumers desire animals to be raised gently by caring people, ultimately so that the animal leads a happier, healthier life. And it's really important from an animal welfare perspective. So animal welfare is less about the moral life associated with slaughter and so on, and it's much more connected with food safety. So if an animal's raised in an environment that is better, that is cleaner, more natural, by someone that cares for the animal, the quality of that meat is going to be superior and better when I choose to eat it. That's the connection we found with animal welfare, which is quite an important insight. And we also know that these consumers are willing to pay for the natural exotic flavour experiences that this care ultimately delivers. And so we boiled all of that down into our core brand idea. Using the NZ as a window into New Zealand, creating transparency, we've developed Taste Pure Nature, which is a global brand platform that helps position New Zealand beef and lamb as a premium product in our global markets and as a marketing umbrella for exporter brand owners to leverage. We took that core brand idea and developed it into what we call our red meat story. Underpinning this story is our core brand purpose. And again, this is, I'm trying to reinforce here the fact that in order to be competitive in an international space, we need to develop unique experiences that are only derived from New Zealand. And so our purpose as farmers is to nurture the finest natural taste experiences. This is our core brand story. It's not necessarily how we would communicate or the messages we would communicate in these markets we want to attack, but it gives you an idea of the core essence that we'll feed from. So nature is the best producer of food, no question. And in our remote, unspoiled corner of the world, we enjoy some of nature's best growing conditions. Our climate is gentle, with clear blue skies and plentiful fresh rains that nourish young, fertile soils. Our wide open spaces are brimming with lush green grasses that animals roam through and graze on freely and happily. As farmers, we work with these natural gifts to produce the one thing you can only get from New Zealand beef and lamb. That's the taste of pure nature. We've taken that story and actually developed it into a brand video, which I'll play for you now, which encapsulates the essence of unique eating experiences that are derived from the approach and the place that we have here.
The recipe for perfect beef and lamb. Take one small fresh country. Make sure it's nice and remote. Now, keep it at the ideal temperature all year round. Next, mix in the farmers. They go perfectly with the nature of this unique place. Add regular sprinkles of rain to really bring out the lush meadow grass. Then let your animals happily graze on this grass all day, every day. And there you have it, New Zealand, the perfect recipe for beef and lamb. Taste pure nature.
Pretty exciting, eh? I'm excited. And if I do get a question, we have a lamb variation of this too. We have a separate lamb one and a beef one. So that's how we're going to encapsulate the messaging and I guess the brand essence when we take it into the marketplace. So thinking about that now, we're in the process of developing an implementation plan. We've highlighted a couple of pilot markets that we're currently considering entering into. So, Beef and Lamb is planning on investing financial resources and time and energy into developing a couple of pilot markets. The brand assets themselves will be available to meet exporting companies that meet the licence criteria and to use for promotion in any other market. But what we're doing is actually trying to focus in on a couple of pilot markets that give us the best opportunity to, get best bang for buck. And so these are the ones that are on the table at the moment. And this is, part of a consultation process with the industry, with meat companies in particular. And we applied a model, a McKinsey model, to help us take a long list of potential countries down into a very tight, refined shortlist, looking at market attractiveness and ability to serve the market. So within these two countries, we're actually going to concentrate, promotional effort beyond a country level into actual city level. So if we were to go into China, we would be pooling our concentrated investment and promotion in Shanghai. And if we were to go into the USA, then we'd be concentrating our efforts into New York, San Francisco and Los Angeles. Not exclusively, but that's where we'd put most of our energy and attention. So that's part of the process now of developing an implementation plan, evaluating the benefits, the pros and cons of each of those two countries, and consulting quite widely with the exporting companies to then basically land on a go, no-go in which country and when. So we're currently working through that at the moment. So that's me, and now I'll open it up for questions, if there are any.
Michael, congratulations on the presentation. It looks really good. And it's a wonderful story, and we all know that. One of the words that we're seeing a lot in supply chain and this whole area is this word called transparency. And you actually used a lot of it in the logo design and all these other things. Have you guys looked at where we are vulnerable as an industry in terms of how we support the front-end message that's going out?
Yes. So one of the key areas of vulnerability is in the environmental space. And look, we've designed this story to be aspirational for our sector. It's meant to take the industry forward and provide a level of focus on particular areas that we need to work in order to enable us to tell the story now and even an improved story in the future. So the environmental area is one of those things, and look, we're conscious of that. And so what Beef and Lamb has recently actually released is a comprehensive environmental strategy that deals with a number of those concerns that we may have around our environmental performance, so that by actively focusing on it and working in that space, we're able to tell the story with confidence, not only now but into the future. So that would be one area. Yeah. Thanks very much for your time.
Cheers. Thanks, mate.